How you doing, guys? This is Eric. Recently on a free flight back to visit some friends in Atlanta. If you want to know how I get my free flights, you can check out the link in the description below. They have the in-seat media display center thing, so I was flipping through all the movies that they had, trying to decide if I wanted to watch Fast and Furious 1 or 12 or anything in between or whatever other movies they had on there. And I just happened across a movie that I'd never even heard of before, a Japanese movie called Survival Family or Survival Family, something like that. And it happened to be one of the best survival movies that I've seen in years. Not necessarily because it's the best movie overall. Like, if you are not into survival at all, it's not necessarily going to be some awesome movie. It's still good, but I think it's just one of the most accurate, kind of like realistic portrayals of what a situation like that might actually look like. And before I go any further, I want to say that I will be discussing the movie in pretty detailed fashion, specific things that happen in the movie from beginning through the end. So if you don't want any spoilers, stop, watch the movie first, and then come back. Although I will say, I don't know where you're going to watch it, because I looked online and I couldn't find it almost anywhere. I got a non-subtitled download acquired to use for screenshots for this video, but other than actually buying the DVD or Blu-ray or something on Amazon, I couldn't find any of the normal services like Netflix or anything like that that seem to have it. So good luck trying to find it. I'm sure it's out there. It's only from last year, 2017. So it's called Survival Family. And I just wanted to go through the movie, give my thoughts on it, on lessons that can be learned from it, things that the characters did that were good, that were bad, and things that we can take away from that as people who are interested in survival preparedness to better be prepared for any sort of situation in the future. So what happens in the movie, this is where the spoilers will start, is there's this family in Japan, and they make a big deal, not a big deal, but they make it obvious about how adjusted they are for modern life, not really self-sufficient in any way, shape, or form. You know, they make a point of showing that the mom is squeamish about preparing a whole fish. She doesn't know what to do with it. They don't even know how to like use a head of lettuce or really cook their own food or anything like that. They're very reliant on their cell phones and just prepackaged meals, the electronics, everything like that. So, you know, they're setting a stage, which is the case for the vast majority of people in Western countries, and not that Japan's a Western country, but in technologically advanced countries like that. And that's where most people are. And one of the best things I like about this movie is that the people don't have to do anything particularly stupid beyond the fact that they are just adapted for modern life, not self-sufficient. A lot of these movies, to create conflict and to create drama and, you know, tension, they'll have the characters do a bunch of dumb stuff. Certainly the characters in this do things that aren't that smart, but they're not because they're dumb. It's just because they don't know any better. They don't do things like lose their minds and do all this, you know, annoying, ridiculous things that just self-sabotage. They just don't know what they're doing, and they're not well prepared for this type of situation. So that's refreshing as well. That's one of the reasons that I like it. So the shit hit the fan scenario in this movie is an EMP. Now, that's one of the things that the characters did wrong, other than the first thing they did wrong is just a general lack of preparedness and lack of skills. That's always a problem. That's something you can fix right now. You just start working on that stuff. Just have some supplies, some level of skills and self-sufficiency, and recognizing these things when they happen. Because if they had known what was going on quicker, they would have been been able to prepare much better, even though they weren't already prepared ahead of time. So it's definitely some sort of EMP event. The reason you can tell that is because not just is the power out for everyone, but unconnected, you know, things like cell phones, alarm clocks, all these different types of electronics are just totally cooked. So if that ever happens to you, you know it's something like an EMP event, and you better be ready to start rolling immediately. Now, one of the other interesting things about this movie is that since it takes place in Japan, the social dynamics are completely different. It's a homogenous culture of, you know, intelligent people, at least compared to other population groups. And so while I do think they slightly don't do justice to how quickly society would degrade even in a country like that, it is interesting to think about the differences of what it would be like in that country like Japan versus US or certainly other places. These people are still, in the movie at least, are still trying to go to work for a few days, with a citywide power outages and trying to figure out, that no one's attacking each other yet, at least, and things like that. So in the movie, they don't even decide to really did anything super serious or did they have to really do anything or make any hard decisions until a few days in. In a major American city, if the power went out completely, like an EMP event like that, I don't even know if you would have minutes. I mean, you would have maybe an hour before things started going completely ape shit. That's in major metro areas. If you're somewhere else, obviously it wouldn't be quite as bad. People aren't living stacked on top of each other. Demographics are slightly different, things like that. But if there was just a citywide power outage, like literally nothing was working, no backup electricity, nothing, total blackout EMP, it would be a war zone in cities, American cities, within minutes. So you would not have any time. In this movie, and probably is the case in Japan, they did have a little time. I don't know if they would really have days like they did in the movie, but they would at least have hours. And that's your opportunity to realize what's happening, go around and try to scrounge or collect as much supplies as you can, find out what you're going to do. So the good thing that they did in the movie, one of the things that they did right was they had some cash. The wife, at least in the movie, had saved up, a hidden stash of cash because, as is most likely the case, in the initial stages, people didn't realize how serious an event it was, so they're still willing to sell some of their things at in super inflated prices, but they were willing to sell them for simply cash. If they'd realized the extent of what was it, at least countrywide. I think in the description of the movie they say it was worldwide, but they don't show you anything else that's happening in any other country. So it's at least as far as the people knew, it was at least a countywide or statewide power outage because they couldn't get a hold of anybody. So they were still willing to sell things for cash in the initial days. So having cash like that could be really helpful because not all events are going to be that serious anyway. So cash is always good. Something as simple as an actual power outage is not even an EMP, could still cause all the payment methods that we normally use, like credit cards and any sort of the Apple Pay or whatever, Venmos and PayPals and all that stuff like that. That would stop working, but you still be able to use cash for the most part. So that was one thing they did right. So they had cash. Another thing they did right is they realized pretty quickly the importance of bicycles once they realized that they were going to have to leave because I think it was the wife's dad had like a rural farm somewhere that they knew they could be somewhat self-sufficient on. So once they realized that the power wasn't coming back on anytime soon and they were starting to run out of supplies, they had a destination. They realized the importance of bicycles. And while they weren't really the best type of bicycles and they didn't have extra supplies to fix them and things like that, which ended up being a problem for them later, they did a good thing by choosing a method of transportation that's much better than just walking. Because even for someone who on a shitty bike, just like a cheap Walmart bike or whatever, that could turn travel a hard 15 or 20 miles a day into an easy 50 to 75 miles a day if you're running on the road. Now, if you are going on the road, a road bike is much, much easier to go on the road, but it's like impossible to use a road bike off-road in even like a yard. These tires are like pizza cutters and they just dig right in. So if you're getting a bike for preparedness purposes, I would strongly suggest you get a mountain bike or at least one of the hybrids that is better suited to at least being able to do some off-roading, because obviously you're going to try to go the easiest courses possible and stick to roads where you can, but that's not always going to be an option for either security reasons or just related to whatever the event is. Roads might be blocked or whatnot. So you definitely want to have something that's not just a road bike. A trailer is even better if you can have it add to that, because otherwise you're going to have everything on your shoulders, things like that. You could jerry-rig some kind of bicycle trailers if you need to, even using like shopping carts or dollies and hand carts. That is really going to slow you down, but it's still going to be a hell of a lot easier than just trying to carry all that stuff yourself. So bicycles and things like that are really a force multiplier when it comes to being able to take a bunch of stuff with you if you have to bug out. And obviously, like I mentioned, them having a destination is huge. When you're bugging out, you have to have a plan. And you can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to leave. I mean, you can if you have to. Obviously, if you need to leave, you leave. But you still have to have some sort of destination picked out ahead of time. And one thing the movie shows also, which I've mentioned before in some of my videos on things that people overlook, I think, is maps. They did not have any maps. They didn't know how to go anywhere without their GPS. And so one of the younger kids actually comes up with a good idea to use like a kid's book that has at least a rudimentary map of the country in it so they can figure out where they're going because all the other normal maps had been wiped out. So these are the type of things that if you have a little bit in the beginning of an event where other people haven't realized how serious it is yet, things like food and water are probably going to disappear pretty quickly still, so you have to have that stuff prepared ahead of time. But other things like either maps or the extra supplies for the bicycles. Maps are easy to get. You can even just print them off on your computer, so you should still have that. But stuff like extra supplies for your bicycles or even bicycles themselves, if you want to buy an extra one or something, people aren't necessarily going to be rushing to buy that sort of stuff as quickly as they, or camping gear and stuff like that, as they would for just the things that they need in everyday life. Because people just don't have even a couple days worth of supplies in most cases. So even if they don't know or think that they're going to need, off-grid type living supplies, camping supplies, stoves, anything like that, they already know within hours that they're going to need food and water, and toiletries and things like that. So that was a good thing. Had cash, used the bikes, had a place to go. And in another situation, they actually went to a grocery store that was pretty much wiped out, but still had some cat food left in it. And by that time, they realized that they could at least eat that if they needed to, so they took that, which is another good thing. I like that the family in this is shown to be completely unprepared for this event, but somewhat resourceful and learning along the way, which is kind of the fun part of this movie. Like I said, the bad things that they've done were general lack of preparedness and skills and supplies, not recognizing the EMP event for how serious it was right off the bat. A big one was not, even when they did decide to bug out, they physically, weren't prepared, didn't have the right types of tie down for their equipment, which ended up messing them up in the future. They weren't like in the right type of clothes. The daughter had like wedges heels and things like that on. They just didn't have in their head how serious this was going to be. And what also ended up being an issue for the movie, which is one thing that everyone, no matter how interested you are, if you're any interest in preparedness at all, the first thing you should get, excuse me, is some way to purify water. There's so many different cheap filters you can get, the straws, Catadine filters, which are slightly more expensive, but there's just lots of things out there that you can have that purify water, and you just have to have that because that is the single most important thing. Especially if you're in a country like in Japan, they came across water sources, but the dad got sick drinking from one because they didn't have a way to purify it, and he wasn't able to start a fire at that point because they ran out of matches and didn't have any alternate methods. So that's another thing where skills come into play because there were a lot of cars that were broken down. They were killed by the EMP. They're all over the place, and you can easily start a fire with a 12-volt battery because the battery itself wouldn't have been fried by an EMP, just the delicate electronics. So you can, especially with something like steel wool or fine flail, you can cause sparks and flames and different things like that with batteries. Some cars even still have cigarette lighters, which that part of the electronics might work because there's no circuitry involved. And there's all sorts of different ways you can start fire if you know that stuff ahead of time. The shit hit the fan scenario is not one you want to learn. So I won't give away the end of the movie completely because some of you guys have probably watched this even though you haven't seen the movie yet. Definitely worth checking out if you can find it. I'm probably going to end up buying the DVD or something like that, even though DVDs are pretty much obsolete these days. It's kind of annoying because all the different services for movies, you can't count on them to have the movie always. Like even though we have a Netflix subscription and a good movie might be on there, you go back a year later and they don't have it on there anymore, which is really annoying. So I still have all my DVD collections. I've gotten rid of all the cases because the only reason I ever kept them was because I figured that if I ever needed to sell the DVDs, it would be much easier with the case. But at this point, DVDs are so worthless, they're barely worth $1 a piece, that I'd rather just get rid of all that. I have hundreds of them, so I got rid of all the space taken up by the actual DVD cases, which did take up a whole shelf, and just put them inside the CD binders, which is pretty awesome. So I'll probably be getting a DVD for this. And like I said, the only really unrealistic part about this movie was the lack of real social unrest that would happen even in a country like Japan. I do think there would be a dramatic difference in a country like Japan versus Detroit or Chicago or something like that. Because like I said, you might, but it wouldn't be as easygoing as they portrayed. I mean, this movie was not supposed to be super gritty or anything like that. Although I did watch it on the plane and it said it was like edited for content, so maybe I missed out on a few scenes of the good stuff. So that's another reason why I'd like to watch it again. But overall, I've seen it billed in other places even as a comedy, which it's not a comedy. It's just sort of but it is very lighthearted compared to how it would really be in that situation. Like it's serious, a serious movie. I would call it a drama, but it definitely doesn't portray it quite as bleak as it really would be in a total EMP situation like that, even in a country like Japan. But they probably would get a few good hours there, whereas maybe even a day or two. Whereas in most major cities in the U.S. and other countries that don't have those totally homogenous demographics, it would just be a complete shit show within minutes. So check out the movie, guys. Like I said, I think it's one of the best survival movies that I've seen in years. And yeah, there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from it. Let me know what you guys think if you've seen the movie. And if you have other movies that you think I should watch and do these reviews on, post in the comments. I've probably seen most of the survival movies at this point, but I won't always think of them. The reason I like this one, like I've already mentioned, is so many movies nowadays, while they still show good survival principles, overall they're not very realistic. They'll have some sort of crazy element like, oh, it's zombies, or oh, it's in a weird dystopian future. It's not just a real world situation where something happens. They're not that realistic. So the realistic ones are the ones I like the most, especially for these reviews, because they're the ones that we can learn from the most. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll talk to you later.